I am open source.
I have made tons of games.
This is a versus displayer, an app that I'm using for local TCG tournaments, but it can also be used for competitive esports in general. What it does is displaying on a big screen the matchups of each round. Each player has their own avatar and nickname, and so they get to watch their own matchup in a fancy manner. Now, the parameters we need in order to run our application are number of players and the actual matchups. Let's set up our UI input for this. I'm going to create a panel container so I can group my elements. And now I'm creating an empty node called dual assignments, which will be the parent of a grid of window dialogues. This will be the individual matchups, and each one of them takes 2 players as input, so I'm putting 2 option buttons. I'm calling this dual assignment and saving it as a resource, so I can use it multiple times. Okay, so now I need to know how many players are participating. If there are 10 players, that means I have 5 matchups. If there are 11 players, then I still have 5 matchups. Keep in mind how odd and even numbers work in this scenario. For this, I need to generate a button and a text edit. Let's see how this works. Okay, so the number of matches will determine the number of inputs. Let's create a script for my match assignment. In it, I'm creating a map which is actually an array of 2 times the matches number, while 2 being the players for each match. Now I need to connect a signal from my generate button, so that when I press it, I can make visible the corresponding number of window dialogues where I can enter the individual players. Let's run this. We have an error because it seems that I forgot to change the name of my text edit into duels number. Trying to run again. Okay, it works, but it seems like I don't have any player data. So let's fix this. I'm now creating a script. It's a database for my players. Here I will file all the registered players while keeping the current participants in each tournament. In my players data dictionary, I keep all the information for each player, such as name, avatar, and more. You can decide your own parameters on this section, and you can always expand upon. Now, in the participants array, I'm entering the current participants. This list changes manually on each tournament. Okay, now I want global access to this data. I will now create a script called matchupsinfo. Inside, I'm putting variables for global use, such as the player names and the player's number. In my ready function, I'm taking the participants list and sorting it by alphabetical order. Then I extract the names and number of players. As I mentioned, these are global variables, so let's auto-load them. And with that, I can now pass my participants list into the dialog windows. If I run this, and again I forgot to enter the correct names in my option buttons, you will see now that I have available for selection all the current participants. So that's great. But now we need to actually run the duel. Let's create a button. It will be called Duel. I'm going to press this button when I'm ready to present the matchups. For this to work, I will use a signal from my button pressed. Here I want to know the number of duels, and then I just insert the matchups into the matchups matrix. Finally, now that I have all the info I need, I proceed to the next scene, where I will do the actual presentation. This is of course where the fun begins. Firstly, let's set up the scene graphically. I'm putting my background image, the VS letters, the player avatars and the player names. With this, I'm going to create an animation. This is the part where you can get however fancy you want, but for now I'm keeping things relatively simple, just making my graphic elements pop up on the screen by translating their positions and scaling. I'll also add a particle effect for more impact. To make your particles burst, just make sure you have your explosiveness parameter up to 1 and add some initial velocity. Now that I have my animation ready, it's time to write some code. I'm creating variables for my player names and avatars, my matchups and table info. In the ready function, I'm generating the matrices based on my matchups info and then randomizing them so I can present them in a random order. Of course, it's up to you if you want to shuffle the order, but in my opinion, it adds more spice. When everything's ready, I'm calling a function named assignMatch, and this is where all the action happens. Firstly, I'm finding which player will be presented, so I'm adding their names to the text label. Then I load their textures, meaning their avatars, from my resources. Finally, I'm finding their table based on my RNG. Now I'm adding the avatars to my player's data icon value based on the paths in my resources. Note that my animation will autoplay on load, so that means I'm ready to roll. Let's test this. For now, I will only assign one match, because my code doesn't know how to handle more yet. And I need to make it full screen so I can see it better. Okay, so far so good, but now I need to keep running this up with the rest of my players. But before that, a quick pause to inform you about our game, Astra Fading Stars, made with the Godot engine. There's a free demo available on Steam right now. Also, check out the fantasy book written in the same world, Song of Elusia, the Ancient Gemstone. Back to adding more players to my presentation. First I will create a label. It's just gonna write the word next. It will appear at the end of my animation, telling me, the user, that I'm ready to proceed to the next matchup. That being said, I want to connect a signal for my animation finished. For this, I'm having a flag. It becomes true when the animation is finished. Also, I increase my matchup index so I can proceed to the next presentation. In that case, if I press my UI accept key, then I'm moving to my next matchup. Just gonna call my assignMatch function with the increased match counter. Here I need to update my match counter value, which works as the index of each iteration. And I'm fixing some errors here because I forgot to mention that you should have a default sprite in case you miss to find a player's icon. I also add some more players to my data, so let's run the app again. This time I'm entering 3 matches. Cool, it works. So we are pretty much done with the core implementation. I'm just gonna add a final act so we can close this presentation. I'm creating a final act function. It just plays its own animation and is called when my match counter is higher or equal to the duel's number, meaning when I'm done iterating. The animation goes like this. It brings me to an end screen with a big duel text appearing and some particles. Here I need to hide these new graphic elements in my ready function. Finally, I'm just adding another flag called finale flag so that I know I'm done with the presentation and that my next input I can quit the application. Just need to update it on my duel animation finished and then check for user input. Okay, so that's it with the base functionality of this app. In the next section, I will implement some extra stuff to add flavor. These will be adding avatar and background skins and also audio and voices. Let's create some skins for the players. And when I say skins, I mean special backgrounds and voice lines. Let's start with the backgrounds first. I'll create 2 more sprites for the left and right background. It will be the same image of each player but flipped according to which side they will appear. To do this in Photoshop, just have the base of your background and create a clipping mask for the new one. Flip it and repeat the process for the other side. Then save it as the name you want with _left and _right. We will use these names in our code. In my player database I have this section. It's called BG Skin. So here I'm entering the name of my background. Now I need to load it. All I have to do is check whether a player has an actual skin that exists in my resources, then I load it. Otherwise, the default background remains. Finally, I'll just create a reset sprites function so I can clear my images for the next iteration, and I will call it in the beginning of my assign match function. Let's run. You'll see that my players have their own backgrounds now, and the ones who don't just go with the default one. Next, I want to add music to my presentation. Now, having the same soundtrack play all the time is kinda boring, so I'd like to have a list of soundtracks. To do that, I'll create another script. It will be the music database, and it will auto-load so I can have global access. This script will include a dictionary for my soundtrack resources, and later I will also put the voice lines. Okay, back to my match assignment scene. I'll create a dialog window which will contain all my tracks so I can choose. Next to it, I'm putting a button so I can trigger it. Now, when I start the scene, I load the music database to my dialog window. Same thing I did when loading my participants. On my matchups info, I'm creating a variable called current music, and when I press the dual button, I will assign the current track to this global variable, so I can call it in the next scene. Of course, I need to also send a signal from my assign music button, so I can make the window dialog visible. And you can see now that I can select my tracks. Finally, all I have to do is create an audio stream player in my versus displayer scene, and then just load the track in the ready function. I'm also creating a dual effect audio. In the final act function, I'm stopping the soundtrack music and playing a specific final audio effect from my dual animation. Let's run this. Great! Now to add the voices. Going to my music database and adding a voice data dictionary. Then I update my players database, entering the corresponding voice lines. Back to my versus displayer scene, I need 3 things: an audio stream player for the voices, an animation player for fading in and out the soundtrack when the voices are played, and a timer to wait for one voice line to finish and then play the other. In my script, Now I'm adding a section to the matchAssign function for the voices. A similar procedure with the backgrounds, but here I only calling out the voice of the left player, and then, after a timeout, I'm calling the voice for the right player. In the meantime, I am also playing the animation to lower my soundtrack volume and then bring it up again. I also need to connect the signal from my timer. And now, let's do a final run at normal speed.
Hoppy potato. You shall leave a like to this video.
To the galaxy's end.
Let's go shopping!
I am open source.
I have made tons of games!
Thanks for watching.